Awesome. Okay. Okay. Hi, everybody. I am Sarah Guillermo from Ignite. Thank you so much for all of you for joining us this evening. We are so thrilled to be partnering with Cosmopolitan Magazine and Rock the Vote to flex our political power at the polls this year twice with our campaign called Vote Twice. And so some of you may have seen these fabulous shirts that Rebecca Minkoff so kindly created and has been selling on our behalf to really raise money and to raise awareness about getting first-time voters um, and millennial voters out to the polls for both the primaries and for midterm elections. And so tonight we're going to spend some time coaching and sharing all of the fabulous Rock the Vote resources on how to register and engage voters. And then we also have this audacious goal of registering hundreds and thousands of voters across the country between now and November. And so we have a lovely tool that we're going to share with you of how you can help us do that and move that number closer and closer to its goal. And so I will share those resources after Melissa. We have the fabulous Melissa Wyatt, who is a policy associate with Rock the Vote, who has prepared amazing resources for us this evening. And so I'm going to pass it over to her, and she's going to talk through, and present all of the amazing resources that we have. Thanks, Melissa, for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me, Sarah. I'm so excited to be talking to everybody tonight. So really quick, before I jump into the nitty-gritty of everything, I just wanted to give you guys a quick overview of everything that I'm going to be covering tonight, and then the resources that we'll have available for you afterwards so that you can register voters in your community. So first things first, I'm going to talk about some general best practices that apply to voter registration, things that we've learned over the years at Rock the Vote that can apply to registration events that you're running, no matter what state you're located in. And then after that, I'm going to dive a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of things that are important to know when you're planning a registration event or a longer-term campaign, and the things that you should have in mind both before an event, during an event, and afterwards. And then I'm also going to cover some state-specific tips when it comes to doing paper versus digital registrations or voter ID laws that you might need to know about. So talking about things like that. And then I'm going to wrap things up by talking about the ways that you can track your progress when you're registering voters so that you can continue to engage with them even after you've submitted their forms, and so that you can do GOTV with them and make sure that they're actually engaged to turn out in the elections. And then at the end, we're going to share the toolkits and resources that we have for you guys to use after this. And so without further ado, I'm going to go into some of our general best practices for voter registration. And so the first thing that I wanted to talk about tonight was paper versus digital. And so when I dive into the state specific section, I'll have a little bit more detail on this, but when it comes to when it makes sense to use paper forms versus when it makes sense to maybe have a tablet and direct someone to an online voter registration tool, I would say that it's best to generally use paper forms when you are in a crowded, busy area. If you're working in a state that doesn't have a state-based online voter registration tool, and when you just might have a lot of people coming at you from a lot of different angles. And then digital registration is really great for social media campaigns, really good to coordinate maybe with student or community organizations for them to communicate it to any members whose email that they have, distribute it to any lists. And then if you're also doing like door-to-door registration, if you're like on a college campus and you're in the dorms or something like that, then like having a tablet can be really useful in that case to direct people to an online tool so that they can get everything done right there. But in those kind of crowded situations, you would probably want to revert back to the typical, clipboard and paper voter registration form. And the next thing that I also wanted to highlight is the Vote Twice campaign has its own online voter registration tool that you guys can all use. But if you're in a situation where you're registering someone with a paper form, it's really important to make sure that you can follow up with them afterwards and that they have resources and information about. And so a link that I created that everyone can use is right here on the second bullet point. So it's rtvote.com/VT reminders. And so that goes right to the Vote Twice election reminders tool. And so it just gathers people's email and zip code. It's really super quick, and you can have it pulled up on a tablet or a mobile device. And so after somebody registers with a paper form, I would always recommend that you have something ready for them to even just jot down their email and zip code for you to manually enter later, so that they get looped into the Vote Twice election reminders kind of universe, and that they automatically get reminders pushed to them about any local, state, federal elections that they have coming up. And so it will engage them both for the 2018 elections, and it'll kind of keep them looped in for the future as well. And talking more about paper voter registrations, something that I think can actually be really useful is, instead of when you're trying to register voters, waiting for them to come to you or trying to initiate a conversation before you hand them materials, we found that it's actually really helpful to just have the pen, paper, and clipboard in hand. And when you first approach somebody about registering, immediately start trying to hand them the registration materials. A lot of people will actually just kind of take it and instinctively start filling it out. This also works if you have tablets out in the field as well. And so it just makes the process a bit quicker and easier, and it's just a quick tip to help you maximize the number of registrations that you can generate per hour. And then no matter what state you're located in, you always want to make sure that you're checking forms for accuracy. There's a lot of common mistakes, like people mixing up the sections to put today's date versus their date of birth, or not putting their entire signature, or putting or leaving blanks for their driver's license or social security number. And so while the person is still there, you want to make sure that you're reviewing their form really quickly with them. A lot of states won't let you make changes to the forms after a person is left. And in general, it's just a bad practice to change somebody's voter registration form anyway. And so you want to make sure that pretty much everything is kosher before the person leaves, so that everything's ready to go and you don't have any problems where you need to track that person down and reach back out to them after the fact to get their registration processed. And then something that we have in the toolkits that we will be giving you the link to later is actually a few pages of answers to frequently asked questions. And so just kind of being ready for the fact that there is sometimes a lot of confusion about dates and deadlines and why certain elections are important. A lot of people will ask, will registering to vote give me jury duty or something like that? And so just making sure that you've reviewed the answers to those FAQs and that you're kind of ready to answer anything that anyone might ask, and that you're prepared with information about upcoming election dates, any deadlines, when people can expect to get a voter registration card back, and that kind of stuff. And then just a couple more points before I move on to the state specific stuff. But when you're running a registration drive, you'll often have a lot of people just respond when you ask, are you registered to vote? Can I register you to vote? And they'll just say, oh, I'm already registered, and kind of keep walking by. But sometimes that can be an excuse, or even if it's not, it's really important to follow up with, well, are you registered at your current address? Can I update your registration with you? Or that's great that you're registered. Can I sign you up for election reminders? And so just kind of having those things in your back pocket of other ways to engage people. Election reminders tends to be a really effective way to engage the people who are already registered. Can be really important to make sure that you are maximizing the number of people in your community that you're reaching with your voter registration efforts. And then my last general tip might seem obvious, but it really, really makes a difference. It can be really nerve-wracking to kind of approach strangers with voter registration, but just being all in and remembering that this is really fun and showing everybody who walks by you that you're having a lot of fun can really make a difference. So just make sure that you're like smiling with your team, that you seem welcoming, that you're waving to people who are passing by. And it's really important, if you are set up in a certain location, that you're not just sitting behind a table it's really important to get up, stand up, and get in front of the table that you have or any other setup and make sure that you're really circulating and walking up to people rather than waiting for them to approach you. And so those are a few of what I think are the most important general tips. And without further ado, I'm going to jump into some of the advice and kind of lessons learned that we've had at Rock the Vote about how to make sure that any voter registration campaigns that you plan are the most effective and that you have all of the resources that you need in advance so that everything goes off seamlessly. And so let me go to the next slide. Okay. So when planning a voter registration event, the number one thing that you should make sure that you do before you make any plans is make sure that you know your state's rules and regulations. And so at Rock the Vote, we've developed state-specific toolkits that you can download after this that detail any registration or reporting requirements that might exist in your state. There are also some states that have training requirements, either for the leader of a registration group or sometimes for everybody who's registering voters. And so it's really important to make sure that you know what the process is to request voter registration forms, what types of forms that you can use, who is eligible to register or pre-register in your state. And so our toolkits do contain all of that information, but as far out as you can before starting to register voters, it's just really important to make sure that you reviewed that and have a good understanding of that. In states with training requirements, sometimes those training sessions are only offered once a month, which if you're working on a tight deadline can be a little bit difficult. So just kind of knowing in advance that those things might exist is really helpful. And that is pretty much my number one tip. But if I had to pick a number two tip, I would say that to make sure that a voter registration event or campaign is as effective as possible, picking a great location is absolutely crucial. More than anything else that you can do as far as planning out the details of an event, it's really important that you pick locations, whether it's digitally or whether it's in person, of where people will already be, whether it's like places that they're already interacting with online, whether it's community events or concerts or sporting events or like places that you know your community is going to be at. And so if you want to generate as many applications and registrations as you can an hour, I found that it's the most helpful to kind of insert yourself into something that's already happening. It can also be really great to host your own events, but especially when you're kind of getting the ball rolling, being in places with high traffic makes things a lot easier. So on average, voter registration drives, each volunteer will usually get about 4 applications an hour. But if you're going somewhere that's really high traffic, where people are waiting in lines and have nothing else to do, then you can really amp that up and get a lot more registrations per volunteer per hour. And so just keeping that in mind can really make sure that you're being as effective as possible. And just making sure that you have any supplies that you're going to need in advance, making sure that you have lots of pens and clipboards and lots of registration forms and those kinds of things. And then, okay, let's see, what else was I going to talk about? So something else that's also really important is making sure that you've built a great team to work around you. And something that I think is really effective when you're training your volunteers is maybe even having them meet you 30 minutes before an event is scheduled to start, and then have everyone practice registering each other and have everyone practice asking each other questions about the process the same way that any other regular person might be interacting with them. And that kind of, shakes off the nerves, gets everyone in the right mindset, and both having practiced registering someone else and registering themselves, make sure that everyone's, again, kind of in the same mindset and just makes things run a lot more smoothly. And as far as publicizing your event, especially if you're running a longer term campaign, it's really great to reach out to places like local radio stations, local news outlets, or online publications, campus publications, because they might be really interested in covering what you're doing. And if you make a case for why it's important in 2018 for them to be writing an article about this, maybe you can place an op-ed about the 2018 elections and what you're doing. Maybe you can have them come out to cover an event, but this is just going to continue to generate more coverage. And so combining that with a social media campaign can really increase the number of people who hear about what you're doing. Even if they don't make it to an in-person event, you can at least generate a more widespread awareness. And so with that, I'm gonna move on to some of the tips and tricks that we've learned for what to do during an event. And so again, like I mentioned earlier, having accuracy checks when the registrants are still there on site to make sure that everything is filled out correctly is super crucial. For people who fill out paper forms or for people who say they're already registered, looping them into the election reminders via rtvote.com/VT reminders, or just through the general online URL for the Vote Twice election reminders is really, really great. And again, you can even just have that pulled up on your personal phone, or you can have like a piece of paper and people write down their email address and their zip codes that they can get those reminders. And then capturing content is also really, really great to generate interest and coverage about your events after it's happened. And especially for a longer term campaign, helping to build momentum, because if you can post on social media showing people who are registering and really demonstrating that what you're doing was successful, then people will start to get excited. They'll want to be a part of that momentum. You can find more volunteers who might want to join the cause. Some people might be interested in registering themselves online after they see it. And so that's also really important. And then just continuing to be proactive and engaging with people. And like I mentioned earlier, just making it look like you're having the time of your life will entice other people to want to be a part of what you're doing. And so just having a really positive attitude goes a long way and really makes a difference. All right. And then after your event, a couple of things that are really good to have in mind are that you want to make sure that you're tracking everything that you're doing. And so for the Ignite Vote Twice campaign, there are a couple of specific methods of tracking that I'm going to talk about a little bit later in the presentation. But just for any paper forms that you collect, making sure that you're capturing the basic information about these people, getting them subscribed to election reminders so that they're part of our universe and that they're informed about what's going on is super important. And that makes it really easy to do GOTV efforts, because once you capture people's contact information, you can develop a longer term relationship with them where you give them resources and information, and then they can become an informed and empowered voter in the long term, which is really great. Another thing to note is every state does have different legal requirements for this, but delivering any paper forms that you generate as soon as you can is super important. So if you're able to even bring them by that evening after an event or within 24 hours, that's really important. And then also the faster the processing time, then it's just better for the voter when they get their voter card in the mail right away. And so you just want to make sure that you're abiding by those requirements. And those are also detailed out in the state toolkits if you have specific questions about what the requirements for your state might be. And then a couple of other things about keeping general momentum going around what you're doing is making sure to really thank your volunteers and any kind of teams working with you, and make sure that they feel really valued and empowered, and talking to them about the significance of what they're doing. Like I mentioned earlier, the average for volunteers is they'll collect about 4 registrations an hour. If you really strategize about where you're having an event, that of course will be higher, but sometimes people will be like, oh, I only got 4 registrations today. But reminding your volunteers that the right to vote is a huge deal and it's precious, and people have fought for it for hundreds of years in this country, and you just gave that precious right to someone is really critical. And just reminding them of the significance of what they're doing can really be helpful in getting them to be continue to be engaged with what you're doing throughout the election season, and can also be really helpful to develop a volunteer cohort for when you're going back out and doing GOTV efforts in the fall. And of course, after you have your first activation, it's always great to immediately start planning your next event. For everyone who participated with you, letting them know when you'll be back in touch with them, even if you don't have solid details, just being, hey, I'll loop back in with you in 2 weeks for us to start brainstorming what we're doing next, or I'll Facebook message you tomorrow, whatever kind of works in the context of what you're doing. And if you do good tracking and you're really capturing the information of the people that you're registering, then like I mentioned, it makes it a lot easier to do follow-up in GOTV, and framing the work that you're doing as developing a relationship with each person that you're registering can be a really helpful perspective for the long game of what you're doing here. So it's not just registering someone and submitting the form, it's also over time getting to know them and providing them that critical information so that they know how to participate in our elections and that they also know why it's so critical for them to participate. Okay, and then next, I'm going to move into some of the state-specific tips that I had. There are a ton, but I wanted to pull out some of the top line ones that generate a lot of questions. And so I'm going to cover voter ID requirements that exist in different states, any training and registration requirements that you might need to be aware of. I'm going to pull out a couple of specific state examples for that. Also, when it comes to the question of using paper forms versus using digital registrations or tablets, I'm also going to talk about some states where there's a really clear line of choosing one over the other. And then I'm also going to talk about student voting. And that one's, whoop, I skipped ahead. Oops, excuse me. The student voting is a little bit of a trick question, but super important to cover anyway, because I've found that there is a lot of confusion about that. And so super important to clear it up. So really quickly, I just wanted to cover the states that do have voter ID laws in some form. And so this is a long list, but I quickly just sorted out which states have either photo ID requirements or ID requirements, but it doesn't have to have a photo. And so in each of the state toolkits, I break down what types of IDs are acceptable to vote in each of these states, and then any alternatives for people. And something else that's going to come in the toolkits that might be really helpful for you to have printed out are vote riders, voter ID information cards. And so it's just like these little pieces of paper. You could print out a few or kind of like blow one up and have it posted behind you at an event. But when you're registering people, it's also important to empower them with the information that they'll need to cast a ballot so that they don't get caught up at their polling place. Voter ID can be one of those major issues. And so just kind of being cognizant of what voters are going to have to deal with. And then even when you're registering them, being like, great, now you're registered. Did you know that there's a voter ID requirement in our state? Do you have one of these approved IDs? And if they don't, then kind of like jotting it down and maybe connecting them with vote riders or Spread the Vote or any organizations in your area that might be able to help get them an ID. Okay, and then this is not an exhaustive list, but these are a couple that I wanted to pull out as examples. So like I briefly touched on earlier, states have different both optional and mandatory training and registration options. And so for example, in Florida, you have to register as a third-party voter registration organization before you run a voter registration event. In Colorado, you have to go through training with your local board of elections, and everybody has to take a test. And the leader of the voter registration event has to score 100% and then has the responsibility of training all of the other volunteers. In Texas, there is a program for you to become a deputy registrar that is mandatory, and the requirement for the minimum in Texas is that local registration offices hold trainings once a month. And so that's a state, at least in my mind, that you want to make sure that you're planning in advance with. And then let's see, New Mexico has mandatory training programs for everybody who's going to be registering voters, and every state's kind of a little bit different. The majority of states do not have these requirements, but within the state-specific toolkits, I do note what those requirements are if they do apply in your state so that you know in advance and can be prepared for those things. Okay. All right, and so my next slide, this one kind of addresses the, do I use paper or can I direct people to a digital portal? And so before I jump into that, a couple of things that I wanted to note are if you're in North Dakota, you probably already know this, but North Dakota is the only state without voter registration. And so you might want to run an election reminders campaign instead. Same thing for Wyoming and New Hampshire. They have laws that prevent third parties from registering voters and having voter registration drives. So people would need to register directly, like with a county clerk or a town clerk or something like that. But you can run election reminders and voter engagement campaigns there. It's just important to be cognizant of what is permitted within state laws. And then below that, I have a list of all the states that do not have state pages for online voter registration. And so in these places, I do think that it's best to always use a paper form when you're registering people on the ground. So the way that the Vote Twice tool works is it digitally can help people in states without online voter registration, but if they're registering on a tablet with you, they'd have to print out their form at home later and then send it in themselves. And so in those cases, when you're in a state that doesn't have online voter registration, or if a person doesn't have state issued ID, then you might want to direct them to a paper form by default instead. And so those were some situations that I wanted to note for you guys. Okay, and then this is kind of the trick question that I was mentioning earlier. So there are always a lot of questions about where can students register? Are they allowed to register at their home address or at their college address? Does it really differ by state? But when it really boils down to it, students do have the right to register at the address that they consider to be their home at the time, whether that's their home address or their school address. The only thing is they just would need to pick one. They wouldn't want to be registered in two places at once, but they do have the freedom to choose. And if a person is choosing to register at their home address, then asking them about, maybe having their contact information so that you can follow up with them, make sure that they got an absentee ballot can really be helpful. Okay, great. So one of the last things that I wanted to talk about before we show you the resources that we have for you to use after this are a couple of ways with the Ignite and Vote Twice campaign for you to track your progress. And so one thing that I wanted to note here is using source codes. And so what you see right here highlighted in red in the second bullet point is something that you'll want to add on for any digital registrations that you're doing. And so the front half of that link will apply to everyone, but where it goes to the and source equals Ignite chapter, you'll want to put in your location. And then what that'll do in the digital tool is it'll automatically track all the people who you register with that source code. And so if you have tablets, maybe you want to make a bookmark where the link has your unique source code to make sure that you're tracking everything and that it can be attributed to you so that if you all are tracking who's generating the most registrations, it's automated as far as the digital side. And then when it comes to paper forms, it's also really important if you're trying to do follow-up and GOTV and eventually track of who you registered turned out to vote, is inputting non-sensitive data from the paper forms. So you don't want to be putting people's social security numbers or driver's license numbers or anything that's personally identifiable into a spreadsheet. But if you want to put in that non-sensitive data of people, that's a pretty common technique to match back to the voter file or something after an election to figure out who turned out, or to also gather the information about the people that you're registering so that you can do GOTV efforts later. Okay, and then with that, I think that Sarah's going to jump back in just a second, but we have a couple of pages that we wanted to show you. One thing that I have been mentioning throughout is that we have a portal that you guys will be able to use where you'll be able to download your state-specific voter registration toolkit that'll have all of the specific information that you need. So if there are training or reporting requirements, you'll know about it. You'll know who's eligible to register to vote. You'll have information on the voter ID laws in your state, any rules about updating registrations, and just that kind of stuff. of anything that people might have questions about or that your volunteers or you might want to know.
Awesome. Thank you, Melissa. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We're good? Okay, awesome. So for all of our college leaders, I wonder, do you guys hear a funny echo? Melissa, do you mind muting yourself and seeing if
It's
that's
probably
better? I was like, let's see. Okay. Oh, that's much better. Thank you. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm back. So in terms of Vote Twice swag, we got these awesome stickers, which has the Vote Twice logo. And so those are all actually in an airplane or in a UPS truck headed to either our fellows or our staff members in our particular regions. And so you will all get access to that. And we all will all have buttons too. I think those are coming a little bit later in the month, so we will ship those out to you too. And so in terms of the Vote Twice swag, we have buttons and the awesome stickers, and then we wanted to make sure that as part of your just game plan to register voters, whether you're coming to an event with us or registering voters on your campus community, that everyone's wearing an Ignite shirt and that you all have Ignite pens. So your fellows and our staff members have let us know if they need more of that. So we have that all headed to your particular locations across the country as soon as possible. And then so I'm going to screen share. So there's going to be like kind of a weird moment of a pause. I'm going to screen share to share how folks can register, how folks can join all of our voter registration efforts. So give me a quick second. Melissa, can you tell me really quickly what you see?
no problem. No problem. So right now it's just saying, please wait while the screen loads. So
Okay.
hopefully it'll be just a second more.
Okay, what do you see now?
I see your screen. I see
Yay!
the
Okay.
Vote
Sorry,
Twice
because
campaign.
I can't see you. I was like, I can't see you. Okay. All right, everyone. So Kirsten Rogers, our amazing comms director, is on our webinar right now, so we can all virtual high fives. She has been working tirelessly to help us launch our voter registration campaign vote volunteer like management site. So I'm going to send you all this link, but this is where all of our voter registration volunteer live throughout this campaign. So starting today all the way through November. And so folks are going to be able to work with us on registering voters and register and then doing precinct walks, so canvassing. So if folks haven't done that yet, literally like taking a portion of the community and walking the precinct and help and reminding people to either vote or to register them on the and so this is our little web page. And so we have a couple roles. And our first campaign role is a voter registration volunteer. And so this is to attend community events. You'll engage with different voters and you'll literally like walk them through the documents, just like Melissa shared. And then as she what I so much took away from her presentation, see that everything needs to be. So that's the biggest responsibility is ensuring new voters complete the documentation correctly. And then you can turn all of those pieces back to the event captain. And then the other campaign role is an event captain. And so we want for each of the events, we want one to help us kind of lead our mini group of volunteers. And so that person's going to lead our group of volunteers, communicate with the volunteers, maintain records of all of the voter reg numbers for that day, and then communicate with our headquarters on event experience, share photos, all of that stuff. And so this is actually the first of two trainings that Rock the Vote and Cosmo and I and Ignite are going to share with all of you. So this one's around voter registration. And then in the summertime in August, we'll be doing another one on Get Out the Vote. So GOTV means Get Out the Vote. And we'll be working to help you all in those particular components. So I'm already registered, but here's welcome, Sarah. And so I just wanted to show everybody what this looks like because one, it's super cool. And so you'll go to what you'll see when you pop in is you'll states, and you'll see, oh, hold on, I just did this, modify schedule. So I want to show you. Okay, thank you. Okay, so what you'll see is an activity selector, and then you'll see them by state. So you'll see here California, Colorado, all of our states, and then different events. And so I just wanted to show, like here, hip hop in the park. I surely want to be there. And so I have clicked be there on May 5th, which I won't, but my practice. So you'll just click here, and then you'll really go into the next, and then it'll schedule, and I can't go to the next because I've already scheduled. But this will be kind of our database to collect all of this voter registration information. And you can go into this as many times as you want. If college chapter leaders want to be the event captains, you certainly can, and then you can just organize within your college chapters. But this is our website to house all of that information. Okay, and then I'm going to stop. And then I'm going to pull up your site again. Uh-oh, they said they couldn't see my screen. Oh, that was a waste of time. Oh no. Melissa, are we the only two people that could see my screen?
You know, I
Oh no, other people could. Okay.
oh,
Okay.
I was gonna say I don't
Sorry,
know.
you
Okay.
guys. And I couldn't see that you were telling me that you couldn't see my screen because I was looking at my screen. But I'm gonna, this is all, like I said, recorded, and then we're gonna send you all the action steps. But I just wanted to re-pull up, that. And then, so that's the TRS piece. We talked about swag. And then the big prize, if you, or our big competition between all of our students is that whoever registers the most voters is going to have the opportunity to write about it in Cosmo. And so this little source code that Melissa talked about earlier is super important because that will actually get tracked. So Ignite chapter is obviously the placeholder, but like it'll be Ignite UCLA or Ignite Agnes Scott, and that will then tell us how many voter reg folks have happened at Agnes Scott or at UCLA or all of the different colleges across the country. And then that chapter, and we don't know how many chapters, but hopefully more than one, will have the opportunity to then be able to write about this amazing experience across the next, 4 or 5 months, leading up to the midterm elections. And so, Melissa, did I miss anything? I talked about TRS, swag, and our prizes. Did I miss
Um,
anything?
no, that sounds great. I think that that's it.
Awesome. And then we're going to send all of the information. I know folks need, because uh, Georgia's got a big ol' deadline on Tuesday. And so we will send all of the toolkit information that Melissa referenced. And we're going to set up these source codes. And then we have a couple links on the website for you all to get things. And then, like I said, on the website, for the volunteer component, you'll be able to tell us your events, we'll add them, help you coordinate all of those pieces. But because it's 5:40 and then 8:40 on the East Coast, I want to be mindful of getting to our questions. And so, Melissa, I think actually you're going to be able to answer these a lot more than I am. But let me start reading them out loud. I'm going to go to the Q&A. Okay, so the first question that we had up there, what resources are available for seniors? And I asked Jerry, senior citizens who want to vote and are not registered because of a lack of accessibility.
Okay, I just unmuted myself, so hopefully you guys can hear me. So several things, and unfortunately the answer is that this is probably going to vary state to state and locality to locality, which doesn't mean that I have a universal answer, but a couple of things that can be really helpful with both senior citizens and then also for people with disabilities is it's really helpful to um, walk them through the absentee ballot process. In many states, they actually offer permanent absentee voter lists that mean that you automatically get your ballot mailed to your house in every single election. And so if that is an option in your state, then I would highly recommend walking people through that process. And as when it comes to seniors, things that we have done in the past with our volunteers for Rock the Vote who have been running events in different states are coordinating with different senior centers. And one thing that I would also recommend that's going to kind of apply universally, not just for this, but for a lot of other questions, are to lean on your local election officials. Uh, Pretty much always your local or county election officials are really, really great people who really, really care about increasing voter turnout and engaging their communities. And there are a lot of resources that sometimes aren't obvious, but are available. And sometimes you just have to ask. A lot of localities have programs to help transport seniors to the polls and a lot of other things like that. Again, unfortunately, it does vary, so I don't have a universal answer, but coordinating with your local election official on initiatives that you might have, helping people apply for their absentee ballots, and then looking into any permanent absentee voter lists can be really helpful when you're working with senior citizens or for anyone else who may not be able to get to their polling place.
Awesome. Ready for question 2? Okay, so that was that. So what are resources? Okay, I'm gonna X that one out. The next one is there such a thing as too many volunteers at one event? And I think I have a quick answer to that, and then I'll let Melissa add for the ones that you're all coordinating. So some of our events actually will have a cap. And so like if we get invited, if we so you'll see on the website that there's like a couple festivals that we're going to be able to do voter reg at. So they actually dictate to us that there's only like 3 slots at this time. Some of the events that we're also gonna get you all into or like if it works for your schedule this summer, might be events that are like pay to play or like paying to enter. So like for example, for Bay Area folks, Outside Lands. And man, if we started this campaign 2 weeks ago, I'd be at Baychella tomorrow too. Um, so there so that's the event answer, but Melissa, I want you to talk a little bit more about like if they're coordinating voter reg components for their campus communities, what's the average amount that they should have like per shift?
Okay, I think I'm off mute again. So this is an answer that's probably going to depend on where you are stationed. So I would say that you would probably want to have a minimum of 4 volunteers for any event because you want to have people that can be fulfilling different roles at any given time. And you also want to make sure that you always have somebody at the ready to register a voter, like that you always have an extra person, if that makes sense, so that no one ever has to wait. So I would probably say that like around 4 is a good number. If you are sitting down and tabling within an event that has a little bit less traffic, I think that you could probably make it work with just a couple of people. As a general practice, more volunteers is always better than less. And I found that the way to make that work is to divvy up the responsibilities and make sure that everyone kind of has their roles split up. So, like maybe somebody, maybe one or two people are the election reminders people, and maybe somebody else is the voter information person, and you have a few people out with clipboards. But usually, more is better than less. Always having a few people on hand is better than just you being by yourself or having one other person in most contexts. But yeah, usually the more the merrier.
And the other suggestion too that I had for like staff and fellows too, and for all of the college leaders that are on, and even our high school leaders that I see that are on, like when you're planning to like figure out when to incorporate voter reg, you can certainly do it as you like recruit for new members in the spring and then in the summer and then obviously in the fall. And then this particular source code too, I just wanted to make sure is like the electronic way that you could also leverage your each of your chapter social media accounts. So like it will track if somebody ends up registering to vote online to in the states obviously that Melissa talked about. So just think about that and like how can you some of you have a lot of members, so just figuring out how you can engage all of them in the number of different touch points that are possible. Melissa, our next question is how can you incentivize the voting process to get young people interested?
I love this question. Okay, so there are a few things that are at the top of my mind. So, when it comes to engaging young voters, something that we have found is really effective at Rock the Vote is taking an issues forward stance. And so, what I mean by that is that you don't just want to tell people, go vote because you should, because voting is important. You want to provide a certain impetus or motivation for people. And so, if there are specific issues that are really affecting your community, if there are important ballot measures that are going to be voted on in your state, taking an issues first approach to do you care about gun reform legislation? Do you care about affordable housing? Do you care about gender equality? Do you care about XYZ ballot measure? Then make sure that you turn out to vote because voting is your power to make your voice heard and to make a difference. And so taking that issues first standpoint has been really effective for us in recent years because, as I'm sure that everyone on this webinar knows, young people are a force to be reckoned with. They are informed, like we know what's going on. And so understanding that so many young people have a great depth of knowledge on these policy areas and really being responsive to that, we found is effective. And then also just reminding people that the right to vote is your voice and it's not the only tool in your toolbox, but it's an important way for you to make your voice heard, to demand change, and to demonstrate that your elected officials should be accountable to you.
Okay, thank you. Next question. How can people who have felonies register to vote? Are there limitations? As Melissa transitions to taking, oh, there you go. Okay.
Okay, I'm back. So this is an answer that's going to vary by every single state. So a couple of examples that I'm going to throw out. In Maine and Vermont, no matter if you've had a prior conviction or whether you're even currently incarcerated, you never lose your right to vote. In the state of Florida, you automatically and permanently lose your right to vote if you have a prior felony conviction. And then the majority of states fall somewhere in between. In some states, you can regain your right to vote after release from incarceration. In some states, you need to complete all terms of your sentence. And so it is going to vary state by state. And I know I've been saying this a lot, but in the state specific guides, there is a section about who can register to vote. And so you can use that as a guideline. And then if you want specific details about the statutes, you could always go to rockthevote.org. We have state-specific voting pages that have all the details that you might need to know about rights restoration in your state.
Awesome. And then the next question is, how can people with temporary residence complete absentee ballots?
Okay. So with this, with a temporary residence, I'm going to take that to mean that there isn't a permanent mailing address for someone to receive their absentee ballot in the mail. And so what I would recommend doing again is to probably lean on your local election official for this. Make sure that you have the contact information of your county or town elections board and who you can contact there, because in situations like this, there are often alternatives. They may be able to, if you go into their office, issue you an absentee ballot on the spot, or a variety of other kind of workarounds to make sure that everybody has access to that. And so again, I would suggest leaning on your local election official. These things can vary state to state, so there's not always a universal answer, but that's my ultimate recommendation.
Awesome. Thank you. The next question is from our Agnes Scott chapter in Friends. How can we reassure people who want to register but are concerned about the reliability of voting equipment? Super technical question.
Yeah, definitely. I'm all about election security, so I love this question as well. What I would say in the situation where people are worried about their votes being counted, and for legitimate reasons, there are improvements that we need to make to our election technology, is that there's no reason that is good enough to sacrifice your voice. Voting is absolutely, like, it is your chance no matter what place you come from in life to make your voice heard, and we all are equal at the ballot box. And again, after being involved in the elections community for a while at Rock the Vote, something that I truly have realized is that local election officials really, really take pride in running elections that are fair, that are accurate, that are well counted. And so while of course there are improvements that need to be made, you should never sacrifice your right to vote over something like that. And I would say that it's the same thing for any other concerns about, is my vote really going to matter? Always, always turn out to vote, because you never know what the margins are going to be. There are tons of elections, like tons of elections across the United States that are decided by literally one vote. It happens all over the US every single year. And so regardless of any worries that we might have, our local election officials really do have our best interests in mind. They really are trying to do a good job for us, and we should never sacrifice our right to vote. There are a lot of scary things happening right now, but people wouldn't be trying to make voting more difficult or try to instill fear if voting weren't important. And the reason that a lot of this stuff is happening is because voting is really important, and we can't let this stuff discourage us.
So, last question, because it is almost 9 p.m. on the East Coast. Melissa, we got to let Melissa go home at some point. Our last question is, if online voting isn't available in your state, which it is not available in many states, how will you track how many people we register? Oh, that's an answer. That's a question for me, huh? So Melissa, correct me if I'm wrong. If they use the source code, this doesn't mean just online voter registration, right? This means like voter registration that will then lead them to said forms, right?
Um, I want to make sure that I'm understanding everything correctly. So for the online tool, you would append the source code, no matter if the state has online voter registration or not, walking people through the tool. But for on the ground paper registrations of paper forms that you collect, that's when you would kind of revert to the second option, which is inputting the non-sensitive data from those paper forms and excluding the SSN and driver's license and those personally identifiable things. And so I actually have a spreadsheet template that we've used in the past that might be helpful to share out in the future, of like how we maintain that information and how we would recommend doing that. I'm not sure if that's helpful, but
Mhm.
definitely.
Well,
Some,
internally, we're gonna your basically your event captain's gonna tell us. And so your event captain's gonna have a little thing that they're just gonna tell us how many folks registered voters, and so if you're doing them on your college campus, whoever the captain is for that particular shift will then communicate that information to us. And so that's one way. And then obviously the source codes is the other way. So we're going to add all of that data. And this, our campaign's going to go all the way through November. And so keep working at it. This is not an overnight thing, because it's a long game. We all know this is a long game, and so we are going to track both this way and also via the on the ground efforts. And so please feel free to use your social media channels as college chapters to leverage this. And we'll connect with you once you let me know if you're doing voter registration. Then we're going to make your Ignite Agnes Scott, because clearly Agnes Scott's all over this webinar today, and I hope we had enough pizza. We will have those. So in terms of next steps, um, Melissa talked about a toolkit. So we're going to send you a link, or basically an email with all of the links that you're going to need. So you're going to need all of your state-specific toolkits, which you should also print out. You should print those down so that you can have them. And then we are also in the mail, happening right now, is Vote Twice stickers, Vote Twice buttons, which will be happening a little bit later in the month because buttons take longer than stickers. And then pens, and then we all want everyone to wear their t-shirts. And so that'll be basically like your go-to kind of product to get voter reg pieces going. And then I will also send obviously the link to the campaign so that you can tell us what your events are on your college campuses. We can put them up there and share them with the world. And I think that's it. And then, stay tuned. And obviously, Melissa, please take down Melissa's contact information.
yes.
Melissa's our best friend in this whole process. And so she is going, for all of the little nitty gritty questions, please feel free to reach out to her and ask, because, like we all said, voting is, we fought a very long time to get the opportunity to vote. We have a number of folks in our Ignite network that will still be ineligible to vote for the upcoming primaries and midterms. And then we also have a number of dreamers in our network. And so let's all carry the shoulder, burden and all of that opportunity and that privilege with us as we plan and execute each of these different events and tabling pieces as we this year. I think that's it. So thank you so much for joining us, Melissa. Anything else?
Nope, that's pretty much it. But yeah, you guys all have my email. Totally open line of communication. Do not hesitate to reach out. I love answering questions about voting. So thank you guys for having
Perfect.
me.
Thank you, Agnes Scott. Make sure to text me a picture of your pizza party. Awesome, everybody. Thank you so much. We'll be in touch. Have a good night. I'm off to watch the Warriors. Bye.